My talk is going to be slightly different because we've had huge spans of time and huge geographical areas. My talk is going to be about 30 years worth and it's going to be a couple of 100 yards. So we're looking at a completely different angle. And it's made up of 8 pieces, 8 jigsaw pieces. Now each are standalone, but hopefully what I will do is bring them all together into a whole at the end. So the first one we've got is the location of St Thomas's and St Thomas's Square. As you're probably aware, St Thomas's, which is here, sits very, very oddly within the checker system of Salisbury itself. You can see that the road should have come down here, there should have been a checker, and that sits very oddly. So it looks like there was something there before, but if so, how old was it? And Alex has made an excellent case for having an Anglo-Saxon settlement here, and has made the brilliant point: if a church was placed anew on this site within a gridded street system, would it not, like St Edmunds, have been given a spacious checker? And it's a point which is quite hard to argue against. But if you look at all the churches, St Martin's here, Cathedral here, St Thomas's here, and even St Edmunds at the top, which does not fulfil the checker thing, they all sit outside that checker grid system. So here we have, in slightly more detail, you can see how it's sitting slightly oddly. And the other thing I'd like to point out here is mitre checker. Again, this does not fit easily, like these other later buildings, does not easily fit within the checker system, and so I treat this as infill within this space here, and I'll come on to why in a minute. So, one of the really puzzling things about St Thomas's is St Thomas's Square, which is here. And it's difficult to know why there is a square there. It's on an absolute direct line with the cathedral gate. And so my thought is, could it be in a collection area? Could it be in a setting out area for the cathedral? Could it be in a dropping off point for when the cathedral was being built, as it's on a direct line with the High Street gate? Makes it possible, but I think a much more likely scenario is that it's a very early marketplace. Why? Well, for example, you've got a brilliant north-south route here, you've got an east-west route across the bridge, you've got near the Bishop's Mill here, it's outside the early development, which I'll come on to in a minute. And we've got the Cheese Cross here, and we've got Old Poultry Street, which is now Silver Street. Now, that it's Old Poultry Street makes it sound much more markety, much like you're selling poultry there or something. So, could we actually have a marketplace which stretched from Cheese Cross or the Cheese Market down to Old Poultry Street, which included St Thomas's Square? And I'll come on to the reason behind that in a bit more as well. But now I want to have a look at the chronology of the move to Old Sarum. The move to New Sarum. So the fullest account is given by William de Wanda, who actually witnessed the events. And these are all printed in the roll series. So the first evidence we've got for any sort of thought development again about this was during Richard I's reign, when Richard I gave assent to Herbert Poor. Now, we don't know what that assent was, but that William de Wanda includes it within the narrative of the move to Old Sarum, move to New Sarum, suggests that it was assent for the move at some point. So, if we have a look at the dates, well, Richard I finished his reign in 1199, and Herbert Poor came to be bishop in 1194. So we got a date range when that assent was given within those 5 years. Now the important point about this is it's a full 20 to 25 years before work on New Sarum started. So that's quite a long time in the planning. We don't know what the assent was for. It might just have been a verbal assent, it might have been a written assent, it might have been plans for what the site was, but 20 to 25 years is quite a long time for the planning. We know that before 1213 a site was chosen, and we also know that 1213 Herbert Moore and the canons were planning their ground. So things after 1213 begin to pick up pace a bit. So in 1217 we get the permission to the Pope, or petition to the Pope. In 1219 you get authorization by the Pope. On March the 29th, 1219, we get the wooden chapel built to the Virgin Mary, which was in the Cathedral Close. A service was held there, and the cemetery was dedicated. Again, later in the same year, a few months later, the chapter agreed the removal from Old Sarum to New Sarum. And in 2020, cathedral foundation stones laid, and in 1225, the dedication of 3 altars in the cathedral. So really from 1219, it really picks up pace. But this is all about the cathedral area, this is all about the churches, and there's no indication of timescale for the secular city area. So the next phase of this is the ditches. Ditches were a very, very common form of either minor defence or boundary, both historically, think of your Motte Bailey castles, but also within new towns. It was a very quick way of delineating the boundary. And at New Sarum we've got 2 main boundary ditches. We've got the Close ditch, which forms the boundary to the Cathedral Close, and we've got the Town ditch, or New Canal, which I would argue forms the boundary of the earliest phase, or the earliest boundary of the city area. And in 1228, Hervey, who was one of the canons of the cathedral, was given the tithes within the land, intra fossatis civitatis, between or within the ditches. So I think you can make a quite strong case that the ditches that were being referred to here were the Close ditch and the Town ditch. So here we have the Close ditch running around the Cathedral Close here, and here we have the Town ditch here. And I think that this area here was part between those two areas that the tithes were given to Hervey. So we've had a look at the location of St Thomas's and why it's a problem, the marketplace, or the potential new marketplace, the chronology, the town ditches, and now I want to come on to St Thomas's Chapel. No, not church, chapel. St Martin's Church, the importance of Hervey, and then finally putting it all together into the chronology. So, St Thomas's Chapel. Well, the first thing I would say is that I have found no evidence at all that St Thomas's was ever called a minster. It's next to Minster Street, that's true, but the original Minster Street was what we now call High Street. And even by 1611, on John Speed's map, and here is his map, it's got full of problems, absolutely full of problems, including missing some of the checkers out here. And it's a really difficult map to use. But here you can see it's called the Cathedral, the Minster. And so I think when the Minster is being talked about, we're referring to the Cathedral, not to St Thomas's Church. And part of the reason for that is the very earliest evidence we've got for St Thomas's Church is St Thomas's Chapel, and it's a really important point. In 1238, the first reference to St Thomas's was Master Robert, the rector of the chapel of the Blessed Thomas of Salisbury. So the earliest reference is to a chapel. Now, it was probably a small building, tiny building, made of wood or stone. St Mary's Chapel, which I mentioned earlier, was in the confines of the cathedral, and that was a wooden chapel. So the very first St Thomas's may have been of wood or stone. But as a chapel, it did not have its own parish, and there were very limited things you can do in a chapel. You can only say prayers, and you can only say masses. The pastoral service element, like baptisms, marriages, funerals and burials, remained with the founding church, unless specifically given a license by the bishop. There is no evidence of that, so we must assume that the main pastoral services remained with the founding church. So that brings us on to the question, well, which was the founding church? And there are only really two possibilities. The first is the cathedral, and the second is St Martin's. So, is it the bishop who found St Thomas's church? Well, you can make a strong case for it, and at one time I wrote an entire article putting this case, because Bishop Paul had exceptionally close links with St Thomas as a saint. He was there as a translation of the saint. He was one of only 2 people to see the saint's body. So you can really make a strong case that the bishop was thinking, St Thomas, I've just translated him, let's have a chapel to him. But there's no evidence that the bishop had anything to do, had a direct link with St Thomas's chapel. And the evidence points elsewhere. And the evidence points to St Martin's, but just a brief background to St Martin's. It's the earliest documented church in the area, and here is St Martin's church here, sitting outside the later confines of the city, and there's a small settlement with it. It had its own parish, which probably included this area here. We don't exactly know the details of the early parish, but one Rogation tide, the canons from Old Sarum came down to visit St Martin's as part of the procession, and there was a dispute about it, and that was one of the reasons which was given as to why they had to move out of Old Sarum. And it was also part of the bishop's manor. So there is circumstantial evidence that St Martin's founded St Thomas's chapel. Gets a little bit convoluted, but bear with me. In 1228, the Bishop of Salisbury gave to the Canon Hervey the Church of St Martin with the Chapel of Stratford sub-castle. We also grant to Hervey all other unnamed churches or chapels. Now, the importance of this is it clearly links St Martin with the Chapel of Stratford sub-castle. There's that clear link. Unless, I think you can argue that St Martin's Church was probably the founding church of Stratford sub-castle. So you've got the older church founding a new church up at Stratford. Then, as part of the foundation document for St Edmund's in 1269, the St Thomas's Church is clearly linked with Stratford sub-castle. So, as part of the foundation document, what you're getting is you're getting a description of the parish boundaries. And here we can see the parish of St Thomas, but it says with the Church of Stratford and its appurtenances. Therefore, the supposition is that Stratford and St Thomas's were founded from St Martin's, with Stratford being briefly given to St Thomas's. So if that's right, you get a link between St Martin's, you get a link with Stratford, and you get a link with St Thomas's. And therefore, I think you can make a strong case that St Thomas's Chapel was founded by St Martin's Church. Okay, we've come across Hervey several times. And in 1228, Bishop Hall granted to Hervey, who was probably a canon, the Church of St Martin with the Chapel of Stratford, and all other churches and chapels built or to be built in our city of New Sarum. To fulfil his duties, the bishop granted the tithes of our mills in Sarum and the tithe of all lands within the ditches. Now, this is odd. Why is the bishop giving to Hervey the Church of St Martin with all the tithes, with the chapel of Stratford, within the ditches? And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, what would you need to be a project manager to be building churches within Salisbury? Well, you'd need top cover, you would need senior management buy-in. You've got it with the bishop. You need a power base, and you've got it with St Martin, which has already set up the chapel of Stratford, and you need money. And there you've got your money with the tithes. So you've got the power, you've got the location, you've got the tithes, and what I think is happening here is that Hervey is being parachuted into St Martin's with the intention to build a chapel or chapels, because it says churches or chapels built by Stratford or others, or to be built. So there's obviously the intention to build extra chapels or churches. Therefore, we have St Martin within this thing. We have St Martin, we have the chapel of Stratford, we have the mills and the land within the ditches, and the only thing missing is St Thomas's. And surely St Thomas's could be a chapel to be built, which is under Hervey from St Martin's Church. Also, as the dedication of the new chapel was to St Thomas, there is a link between St Thomas, St Martin and Bishop Poor with Harvey, because Bishop Poor would be pushing St Thomas as hard as he could, and the way that he could do that was through Hervey and through St Martin's. So, the pieces of the jigsaw: the location of St Thomas's and St Thomas's Square, the marketplace, the chronology and development of New Sarum, the ditch, St Thomas's Chapel, St Martin's Church, the importance of Hervey, and now I want to put them into a running order and describe what I think is happening. So, pre-1190, guess could be 1200, whatever, but pre the foundation, probably got a mill up here. The dating of the mill disputed, could be in Doomsday, might be, but isn't named. Almost certainly get a ford or a bridge here with the east-west route, with the north-south route down to a ford here. You get the parish here, you get St Martin's Church and settlement here. You get a very fragmentary evidence of an Anglo-Saxon farm or some small dwelling here with crude yard surfaces. So that's what I think is probably happening about 1200. Then between 1213 and 1219, the farm is no longer, that went on in the 8th century, but you get the site being planned by the canons, and we've got documentary evidence for the site being planned. And then 1219 to 20, we've got the actual start of the site. We get the Pope's authorization to do it. We get the removal of, we get the start of the cathedral here. We get St Mary's Chapel. We don't know its location, but it's going to be in the close. And we probably get the boundary ditch here. Okay, now this is where it gets a little bit more contentious, because I would see that the first stage of the city settlement is here. And part of this is because you get this huge ditch. The two big ditches in Salisbury are the close ditch and the town ditch. There are loads of channels up here, but the two big marker ditches are the town ditch and this. And I see this as the foundation and the boundary of the first settlement. Now, of course, what I just realised today is that these ditches could be built at any time from the authorisation. So they actually might have been setting out and digging the ditches from 1217 or earlier, or even earlier. There's another slightly odd thing. I've mentioned the parish boundaries of St Thomas's. There's a foundation document of St Edmund's Church in 1269, and it lists all the parish boundaries. And these are almost certainly the same as were on the 19th century maps. And they all follow the chequers. So they're all at right angles to each other, or they all follow the chequers, with the massive exception of St Thomas's crossing the marketplace. Now, this was almost certainly to divide up the money that the marketplace would generate between St Edmund's and St Thomas's. But wouldn't it be interesting if actually this marked the roadway? Everything else follows the roadways except this one here. So wouldn't it be interesting if you've got a roadway coming across there? It's a thought. Not a very strong thought, but it's a thought. Right. So here we have our new settlement, here we have the cathedral, and I would like to suggest that we have just outside the city elements here, we have the mill, which would be a natural place for people to come if they wanted to have a market. We have the bridge, brilliant access. We have the main roads, north and south here. It's just outside the close gate, brilliant place for a market. We have the cheese cross up here. We have Old Poultry Street here. So I think that is an absolutely brilliant angle for a market, or place for a market. We have this little building here. There is some indication of something found under St Thomas's Church nave at the moment. It doesn't really matter for this model whether that's there or not. So just going back, and we've also got from St Martin's Stratford Subcastle being developed up here. So we have a marketplace, we have a new settlement, we have Cathedral Close, we have the problem that Herbie has of where do you place your new chapel? Well, we've got the whole of the parish to place it in, basically. You're not going to place it up here, there's no point. And you're not going to place it near to your church anyway, no point. So where do you place it? You place it at a point of maximum activity and maximum number of people. And wouldn't it be fantastic to place it next to your market site? And there is a big, especially in Anglo-Saxon times, there is a big push to place churches or chapels near markets. You're placing it near the market, you're placing it near all your access points, you're placing it on a direct line with the main high street. And you're placing it at the point of maximum population of the first settlement. So that is my explanation of why St Thomas's is there. After St Thomas's, it's probably only 10 years, 15 years, maybe 20 years that the rest of the Chequers get developed. So you've already got an existing St Thomas's, so it doesn't fit into the Chequers. You've got this area here, which was the first area, and then you've got all the other Chequers which were developed later. And the Chequers had more or less finished by 1260, because when you get the foundation of St Edmund's Church here, it doesn't sit neatly within the Chequer. If it sat neatly within the Chequer, we'd have the Chequer coming up, but it's actually still here. So that is the jigsaw coming together into a whole. Whether it's believable or not, I leave you to decide. Archaeology could dismiss this within a single dig, as lots of theories could, but thank you very much indeed for listening.